Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
It's great to be back. And today, we're taking a bit of a left turn, I guess you could say. Usually we're deep in modern sociology or, the latest tech theory.
Right. We're usually talking about algorithms or economic models from the last 20 years.
Exactly. But today, we're jumping in a time machine and going back to 1854. We're looking at a book that I think everyone thinks they know. It's one of those books you're assigned in high school.
And most of us probably didn't finish it.
Probably not. But we think we get the gist. But the way our source author interprets it, it completely changes the game.
We are talking about Lessons from Walden by Bob Pepperman Taylor. And I have to be honest, when I saw this on our schedule, I had a real moment of, really,
I get it.
I thought, are we really going to spend a whole deep dive on Henry David Thoreau, the guy who, sat in a cabin, stared at a pond, and basically told everyone to quit their jobs and go bird watching?
The original minimalist influencer.
Exactly. It just feels a little, I don't know, a little quaint for a show that's all about systemic risk and, the architecture of modern crises.
And see, that reaction, what you just said, that's precisely why this is the perfect book for us to tackle.
Okay, sell me on it.
Because that view of Walden, the whole nature appreciation angle, the idea that it's just a memoir about trees and solitude, that's a complete misunderstanding. Or maybe a neutralization of what the text is actually doing.
A neutralization? What do you mean by that?
It takes the teeth out of it. It makes it safe.
Mm-hmm.
But Bob Pepperman Taylor, our author, he's not a literary critic. He's not interested in the metaphors about the seasons. He's a political theorist.
Okay, so he's looking at it with a different lens.
A completely different lens. He argues that Walden isn't a nature guide. It's a brutal, systems-level critique of how democracies die.
Okay, now you have my attention. So to be crystal clear for everyone listening, this is not a literary review. We're not going to be analyzing Thoreau's prose style or his feelings about loons.
Absolutely not. This is a diagnosis of a machine. Taylor is using Thoreau's 2-year experiment at the pond as a kind of a controlled study, an analysis of the incentive architecture of a free society.
Incentive architecture. That's our language. So let's frame the stakes right here at the top. If this isn't about living simply, what is the core systemic question this book is trying to answer?
The question is about the very foundation of democracy itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we tend to believe, and this is the standard civics class view we all got, that democracy is held up by its institutions.
Sure. The Constitution, voting, checks and balances, the Supreme Court.
The whole apparatus, we call it institutional design. And the underlying theory, the assumption, is that if you build the machine correctly, it doesn't really matter who's pulling the levers. The system protects itself.
Right. The old saying, a government of laws, not of men. If the rules are solid, the game works, no matter who the players are.
But Taylor, reading Thoreau, just flips that whole table over. He puts forward this really devastating counter-argument. He says those institutions are just paper. They're just wood and stone. They're incredibly fragile.
They can't defend themselves.
Not at all. He argues that the only thing that actually sustains a free society is something he calls citizen character.
Okay, character is one of those words. It can sound a bit old-fashioned, maybe a little preachy. In a systems context, what are we actually talking about when we say character?
That's a great question. He means the internal operating system of the individual citizen. More specifically, it's the capacity for self-government. The ability to rule yourself.
So not just participating in government, but governing your own, impulses, desires?
Exactly. Because, and this is the crisis, this is the core of the whole book, if you don't have that specific character structure in your citizens, then liberty, inevitably, almost like a law of physics, decays into license.
And we absolutely have to define those two terms because I think in modern conversation, we use them almost interchangeably. I have the liberty to do this. I have a license to do that.
We do, and that's a huge part of the problem. Taylor is drawing a very hard line between them. Liberty is freedom with responsibility. It's the freedom to participate in the project of self-rule, both for yourself and your community. It implies restraint.
Okay.
License, on the other hand, is just impulsivity. It is the raw, unchecked ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want, with no internal governor, no sense of obligation to anything beyond your own immediate desires.
So freedom from restraint versus freedom to be responsible.
Precisely. And Taylor's thesis, through Thoreau, is terrifyingly simple. A democracy that becomes populated by people who operate on license instead of liberty will eventually destabilize itself from the inside and collapse. It's an autoimmune disease.
So the crisis we're examining today isn't an external threat. It's not an enemy army or an economic depression necessarily. It's a crisis of internal governance that ultimately produces an external collapse.
It is a feedback loop. The internal state of the citizens degrades the external state of the nation, which in turn further degrades the citizens. So our mission for this deep dive is to map that system of decay. We want to understand how a guy sitting by a pond in the 1840s could have drawn a schematic for the exact trap that arguably modern democracy finds itself in.
To do that, we need to understand the world he was living in. You mentioned Taylor treats him as a political theorist, and he places him in a very specific historical context, the Jacksonian expansion. I think for a lot of us, that just sounds like, old-timey history. Why is that specific era so important for understanding this argument today?
Because it's a mirror.
Yeah.
It is a startlingly clear mirror of our own time. The Jacksonian era, you're talking roughly the 1830s and 40s. It was a time of absolute unrestrained explosion.
In what way?
Every way. The economy was booming. The market was suddenly reaching into every corner of American life. There was this aggressive, individualistic, expansionist energy. This was the era of manifest destiny, the belief that they had a God-given right to expand and consume.
So massive economic growth, but also huge social disruption, old ways of life being torn up.
Totally. Think of it like the dot-com boom of the 90s or the crypto craze, but applied to physical land, to commerce, to everything. There was this frantic scramble to get rich, a feeling that the old rules, the old hierarchies of the founding fathers were gone. And in the middle of this, this massive national party, you have this small group of thinkers.
Thoreau and his circle.
Thoreau, his mentor Ralph Waldo Emerson, and the educator Horace Mann. And they're sort of standing in the corner of the party looking deeply, deeply anxious.
They're the designated drivers at the National Frat Party.
That's a perfect way to put it. They are. And they're suffering from what Taylor calls the recurring democratic anxiety. It's this fear that pops up again and again in American history during periods of intense change.
What's the specific fear? What is that anxiety about?
The core thesis is this. Democracy is not a perpetual motion machine. It is not self-sustaining. It is, at its heart, a moral psychological system. And if the incentives of that system, the economy, the culture, the politics, if they all point toward selfishness, if the whole point of being an American is just to get rich and pursue your own private desires, then the system will inevitably eat itself.
It's another feedback loop. The more individualistic people become, the weaker the community gets, which then requires more top-down control to manage the chaos, which people resent, which makes them retreat even more into their own private lives.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the central metaphor of the book. And what I found so striking is that it's not the pond, it's not the cabin. The overriding image is awakening versus somnambulism.
Sleepwalking.
Sleepwalking. Thoreau has these famous lines, "We are sound asleep nearly half our time," and the commonest sense is the sense of men asleep. Now, for years, I always read that as him just being kind of arrogant.
Yeah, a bit of a snob. Look at you sheeple, waking up for your jobs while I'm out here having a profound experience with a squirrel.
The "I'm more enlightened than you" vibe, for sure. But Taylor makes a powerful case that it's a much more technical, systemic diagnosis than that. From a systems perspective, sleep is just functioning on autopilot.
What does that mean, autopilot?
It's when you are fully plugged into the incentive structure around you, without any critical distance. You buy what the ads tell you to buy. You get angry about what the news tells you to be angry about. You chase the status symbols your culture tells you are important. You're a node in the network, just reacting to and transmitting signals. You're not actually generating your own.
So awakening isn't some kind of spiritual, mystical enlightenment.
No, it's a structural break. It's a systems term. Awakening is the moment you step outside the feedback loop. You stop just reacting to the stimuli, and you start to see the mechanism that's producing the stimuli in the first place. Taylor argues that Walden is essentially a user's manual for how to break the trance of the commercial democratic machine.
I love that framing. Breaking the trance. That leads us directly into, I think, the most chilling part of this whole analysis. The source spends a lot of time drawing a parallel between 19th century America and Plato's Republic.
Yes, specifically books 8 and 9. This is where, for me, the theory went from being an interesting historical idea to a deeply unsettling modern diagnosis. This is where the rubber meets the road.
So Taylor and Thoreau before him, they're looking at Plato's cycle of regimes. And it's not a story of progress, it's a story of decay. It's framed as a story about fathers and sons. Can you walk us through this mechanism? Because it feels eerily familiar.
It really does. So Plato lays out this generational decay. You start with an oligarchy, and the archetype is the father figure. Now, the oligarch's primary love, his defining characteristic, is money. He's obsessed with accumulating wealth.
Okay, the money-driven father.
But, and this is a key point, in order to get that money, he has to be incredibly disciplined. He has to delay gratification. He saves, he works punishing hours, he doesn't spend frivolously, he has a clear hierarchy of values. Money is at the very top, and he ruthlessly suppresses all his other desires and appetites to serve that one goal.
So he has a form of self-governance. It might be pointed at a selfish goal, but the internal discipline is there. He's the guy eating ramen noodles for 10 years to become a millionaire.
Exactly. The internal structure is rigid, but then he has a son, and this is the democratic man. The son grows up watching the father, and he looks at him and thinks, my God, you are miserable, you're repressed, you've denied yourself every pleasure in life.
I don't want to live like that.
I don't want to live like that.
Yeah.
The son inherits the wealth, or at least the freedom that the wealth provides, but he completely rejects the discipline that created it. He values freedom, but, and here's the absolute crux of the whole argument, he defines freedom as doing whatever he wants.
And this is that critical shift we just talked about. From liberty to license.
It's the moment of the fall. To this democratic son, all pleasures, all desires are equal. There's no hierarchy of values. Plato says one day he might study philosophy, but the next day he'll get drunk. One day he'll go to the gym, the next he'll be lazy. He might dabble in politics. He might dabble in business. His life has, and this is a quote, neither order nor necessity.
He becomes a moral relativist. There's no higher or lower pleasure. It's just what I feel like doing right now.
Yes. And if you try to tell him, hey, maybe some desires are better than others, maybe you should prioritize this over that, he accuses you of being oppressive. He says, don't judge me. All appetites are equal.
And you can already see where this is going. When you scale that up from one person to an entire society, you get a feedback loop of chaos.
Absolute chaos. Because when your whole culture is made up of these sons of democracy, individuals who refuse to inhibit any desire because they see all inhibition as oppression society becomes fundamentally ungovernable. You can't build a stable community, you can't tackle long-term problems when everyone's operating on momentary impulse.
And that chaos, that feeling of instability and danger, creates a public demand for order at any cost.
And that is the trap. The chaos becomes so frightening, the crime, the social decay, the constant conflict becomes so unbearable that the sons of democracy eventually throw their hands up and welcome a tyrant.
They look for a strong man, someone who promises, I alone can fix it, I will restore order.
They willingly trade their chaotic freedom for the promise of safety and stability. So the internal decay of character in the citizens leads directly, mechanically, to the death of the political system itself.
The source quotes Horace Mann on this point, and the imagery he uses it's just haunting.
It is. Man's great fear was that in a monarchy you have a king to check your behavior. But in a democracy there's no external check. It's all on us. So if our selfish desires swell to the extent of their capacity, he says it's like morning dew suddenly enlarged into an ocean.
Just drowning everything. An entire society inundated by its own appetites.
Think about that image. A single drop of dew on a leaf is beautiful, harmless. But if every single drop simultaneously expands into an ocean, that is the terrifying, explosive power of human appetite when you remove all constraints, both internal and external.
And Emerson saw this too, right? He looked at Napoleon, who he called the incarnate Democrat. He saw him as representing this new middle class that wanted to get rich without any scruple concerning the means.
It's the striving self, completely untethered from any moral or civic anchor. Just pure, naked ambition and desire.
Okay, so this is a powerful historical theory, but let's bring it into the present. Because Taylor doesn't just leave this in the 1850s, he connects this cycle to very modern examples that make you realize this isn't just history, this could be a current events analysis.
He does. And one of the most compelling connections he makes is to the work of Daniel Axt, who talks about the democratization of temptation.
I highlighted that entire section. He uses the phrase self-control fatigue.
Right. Think about the system we live in right now. The modern market system offers a level of freedom and affluence, that is. It's historically unprecedented. You can have any kind of food you can imagine delivered to your door in 30 minutes.
You can get instant credit for a purchase with 2 clicks.
You have a device in your pocket with access to nearly every movie, song, and book ever made. You can gamble on sports from your couch. You can binge watch an entire series in one weekend.
The morning dew has become an infinite ocean of options and temptations.
And this creates a profound paradox. Axt and Taylor argue that democracy, to function, requires more self-control from its citizens than a tyranny does. In a tyranny, the guards in the watchtower control you. In a democracy, you have to control yourself.
But the economic engine of that very same democracy, the free market, is explicitly designed to erode the willpower you need to maintain it.
It's incentivized to break your self-control. Every algorithm, every notification, every piece of targeted advertising is a precision-engineered weapon designed to trigger an impulse, to get you to click, to buy, to consume, to react now.
So we're exhausted. We're suffering from self-control fatigue. The cognitive load of constantly saying no is so high that eventually we just give up and say yes to everything.
We become the democratic son, living a life of neither order nor necessity, just bouncing from one stimulus to the next.
The source also brings in Jonathan Franzen's novel Freedom.
Yes, which is such a perfect literary illustration of this.
There's a line where the characters are described as being pitied for being so free. That phrase has been stuck in my head since I read it. Pitied for being free.
It's the burden of freedom. The characters in that book are completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of choices they have. They're unable to govern themselves because there are no guardrails, no clear structures for a good life. They have total autonomy, and it makes them miserable and destructive.
It perfectly illustrates Plato's point. Freedom without an internal discipline, without a hierarchy of values, isn't liberty. It's just a terrifying, chaotic void.
It's the anxiety of the blank page.
So if we were to map this out as a system, to really look at the architecture of incentives that Taylor is describing, let's lay out the components.
Yeah.
We have the actors, individual citizens, the economic markets, media systems.
The incentives driving those actors: consumption, social status, partisan identity.
And as you mentioned earlier, the incentive of just paying attention to the times.
Yes. This is the Rose core distinction. Read not the times, read the eternities.
Yeah.
This is a crucial piece of the systems map we're building.
Let's unpack that, because it sounds a little poetic, but you're saying it's a technical distinction.
It's deeply technical. When Thoreau says the Times, he's not just talking about, the Boston Daily Times newspaper. He's talking about the entire feedback loop of the immediate, the transient, the now.
The 24-hour news cycle, the infinite scroll on social media.
Exactly. It's the gossip, the latest political scandal,
Yeah.
the daily stock market fluctuations, the polling data, the celebrity tragedy, the manufactured outrage of the day. It's noise.
And from a systems analysis perspective, the Times functions as a kind of a distortion field.
That's a great way to put it. A distortion field.
Yeah.
If your entire information diet consists of the Times, your output, your worldview, your moral calculations will be hopelessly distorted. You become purely reactive. You are sleepwalking through the news cycle, mistaking the noise for the signal.
So what are the eternities then?
They are the structural truths, the underlying principles that don't change day to day, the laws of physics, the patterns of history, the fundamentals of logic, the basic tenets of morality that transcend any single political moment. Thoreau is arguing that you cannot successfully navigate the system if you are perpetually trapped in the high-frequency, low-signal feedback loop of the times.
This seems to lead directly to what the source calls the expediency trap. And I think for a modern audience, this is maybe the most challenging part of the argument, because our entire culture is built on being practical, on being pragmatic.
This is the absolute moral core of the book. Taylor dedicates a lot of time to Thoreau's critique of a philosopher named William Paley. Now, Paley was a major proponent of utilitarianism.
Which is the idea that the most moral action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. A kind of cost-benefit analysis for morality.
Right. Paley argues that we should always calculate morality based on the probable consequences. We should do the expedient thing, the most efficient, the most practical thing, the thing that causes the least amount of trouble.
It sounds so reasonable on the surface until you apply what Thoreau calls the drowning man test.
Exactly. Thoreau brings up this classic ethical dilemma. If I have unjustly wrested a plank from a drowning man, I must restore it to him, though I drown myself.
Paley, the utilitarian, will look at that and say, well, hold on, let's do the math. One person drowns either way. You dying is a high cost. It's highly inconvenient. Maybe you should just keep the plank.
And Thoreau's response is an absolute no. You give back the plank. End of calculation, even if you drown.
Because justice in this view is a principle. It's an eternity. It's not subject to a cost-benefit analysis.
And here is the devastating systemic implication of that. A system built on expediency, on market efficiency, on political stability, on choosing the lesser of two evils, that system will inevitably find itself supporting monstrosities.
The great example from his time being slavery.
Slavery. That was the entire context. Thoreau was watching his neighbors, good church-going people in Massachusetts, perform this Paley calculation in real time. They knew in their hearts that slavery was a profound moral evil, but ending it would be so inconvenient. It would crash the national economy. It would shatter the Union. It would lead to war. It was inexpedient. And so they compromised. They found ways to live with it, to manage it, to regulate it.
They got caught in the expediency trap of the system.
And Thoreau's radical point is that the moment you begin to calculate the cost of doing the right thing, you have already lost. You are simply negotiating the price of your own soul.
Okay, so we have a pretty grim diagnosis. The democratic system, particularly when paired with a market economy, is designed to trap us. It traps us in expediency, in impulse, in noise. It systematically turns us into these democratic sons who lack the character for self-rule.
A pretty bleak picture.
But Taylor doesn't just, leave us there in the burning building. He spends the back half of the book outlining Thoreau's proposed solutions. And again, he stresses that these aren't just lifestyle tips. They are counterstructures.
Yes. They are tangible mechanisms for systemic resistance.
Let's walk through them. Mechanism number 1. Voluntary poverty.
And we have to stop right there and redefine that term because it sounds terrible.
Please do, because I don't think anyone listening is excited about the idea of being poor.
Voluntary poverty, in the way Taylor explains Thoreau's use of it, is not asceticism. It's not about wearing a hair shirt and suffering for the sake of suffering. It is a strategic tool for acquiring independence. Think of it as economic resistance.
It's about creating leverage for yourself against the system.
It is entirely about leverage. Think about the incentive shift. If you require luxury, if you feel you need the big house, the new car every 3 years, the expensive vacations, the status signals, then you are completely beholden to the system that provides those things.
You can't rock the boat.
You can't. You have to keep the job you hate because you have a mortgage. You have to stay silent when your company does something unethical because you have car payments. You are, in a very real sense, owned by your needs.
But by consciously and voluntarily reducing your material needs.
You break the system's leverage over you. You create what the source calls a resting place. It's a space outside the direct gravitational pull of the economy where your moral judgment can be clear, where it isn't constantly being clouded by your financial interest. If you don't need their money, they can't buy your compliance.
But Taylor adds a very important nuance here, which I really appreciated. He's very clear that this is a project for the affluent.
Yes, and this is critical. Taylor is careful to point out that Thoreau is not preaching to the destitute. You have to have the option of eating in order to choose to fast. A person starving in a famine is not practicing voluntary poverty.
So this isn't a prescription for the poor, it's a critique of surplus.
It is a direct challenge to the middle and upper classes, the people who have enough but are trapped on the hedonic treadmill, constantly striving for more. It's a call to them saying, step off. The race you're running is leading you and the whole country off a cliff.
So it's a form of economic resistance. It's like building a war chest for your own conscience.
You could call it creating a freedom fund for your soul.
I like that. Okay, so that's mechanism 1. Let's move to mechanism 2, liberal education, or as we might frame it, cognitive resistance.
This connects to Thoreau's vision of the noble village. He had this idea that a town should spend its money not just on roads and bridges, but on culture and philosophy.
The quote is, instead of noblemen, let us have noble villages of men.
Right. But the contrast Taylor draws is what's really important for our analysis. He contrasts this vision with the dominant modern view of education, and he references the economist Brian Kaplan to make the point.
Kaplan's signaling theory of education.
Exactly. Kaplan's view, which has become incredibly influential, is that the primary purpose of education is economic utility. It's vocational. You go to school to get a credential, to signal to employers that you're smart and conscientious so you can get a good job and make more money.
So if a class doesn't directly contribute to your future earning potential, it's essentially a waste of time and money.
That's the logic. And Taylor contrasts this with what he calls the Fora Robinson view. He quotes the novelist Marilyn Robinson, who described the purpose of a liberal education as building a mind you want to live with.
That's a beautiful phrase.
Isn't it? Because you are, after all, stuck inside your own mind 24/7. It should be a well-furnished and interesting place to be.
So from a systems perspective, how does reading Plato or Shakespeare function as a counterstructure to democratic decay?
A liberal education studying philosophy, history, art, literature, what Thoreau called the eternities, it functions as a counter-incentive structure. It trains you to value things other than short-term economic gain. It teaches you to appreciate complexity, to understand historical context, to recognize beauty. It disciplines your perception.
It inoculates you against demagoguery and simplistic propaganda.
It's a cognitive immune system. If you understand history, you can recognize old patterns of tyranny when they reappear. If you understand logic, you can dismantle faulty arguments. If your education is purely vocational, you might be very good at how to do things, how to code an app, how to market a product, how to engineer a bridge, but you may have never spent any time thinking about what is worth doing in the first place.
You become a highly skilled tool for whatever the prevailing system wants.
A very efficient cog in the machine. Liberal education is designed to make you the operator of your own conscience, not just a tool in someone else's hand.
Okay, so we have economic resistance through voluntary poverty, cognitive resistance through liberal education. That brings us to mechanism 3, nature, which we can call perceptual resistance.
And this one is probably the most misunderstood part of Thoreau. Taylor grounds this analysis in a distinction made by the writer Wendell Berry between statistical knowledge and local knowledge.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure, statistical knowledge is abstract, it's detached, it's scalable, it's big data. It's the knowledge that serves centralized power governments, large corporations. It looks at a forest and sees board feet of lumber. It looks at a river and sees megawatts of hydroelectric potential.
It's the view of the world from a spreadsheet from 30,000 feet.
And Wendell Berry calls this kind of knowledge morally obtuse. Because from a spreadsheet, you can't see the specific beauty of that forest. You can't see the family that has fished in that river for generations. You don't see that maximizing the crop yield by 20% also poisoned the local well.
And local knowledge is the opposite.
Local knowledge is intimate, it's particular, it's rooted in a specific place and time. It fosters affection, care, stewardship. It's not knowing the average rainfall of a region, it's knowing that this specific field tends to flood after a heavy rain, or that this specific oak tree is where the owls nest.
So how does a walk in the woods connect to being a better democratic citizen?
Because nature is the ultimate non-negotiable feedback loop of reality. Taylor quotes Thoreau saying that nature is unpredictable, never entirely revealed.
You can't spin a thunderstorm.
You can't spin it, you can't bully it, you can't create a focus group to change its opinion, you can't negotiate with a drought. If you don't plant your beans at the right time, in the right soil, they die. Period. Engaging with the natural world on its own terms forces humility and an acceptance of limits.
It's a direct antidote to human hubris.
The perfect antidote. The industrial and market system constantly whispers in our ear that we can control everything, that we can engineer our way out of any problem, that we can pave over the inconvenient parts of reality. And nature, quietly and implacably, just says, no, you can't.
So engaging with nature realigns the citizen with reality rather than with the human-made fantasy of the market.
It pulls you out of the somnambulism, out of the trance of human systems, and it wakes you up to the hard, beautiful, unyielding facts of the world. And that humility, that acceptance of limits, is an absolute prerequisite for democratic character. If you believe you are a god who can remake the world to suit your whims, you will act like a tyrant. Nature reminds you every single day that you are not a god.
It feels like all three of these mechanisms, economic, cognitive, and perceptual, are all converging on the central theme of our show. They are all strategies for fixing a crisis in perception.
That's exactly right. This is where the 19th century theory slams directly into our 21st century reality.
So let's talk about those present-day implications, because Taylor connects this breakdown of character directly to the modern breakdown of truth.
This is what he calls the erosion of shared reality.
We talk constantly about alternative facts and fake news, but our public conversation usually blames external factors. We blame the algorithm, we blame foreign interference, we blame cynical media moguls. But Taylor's argument points the finger somewhere else.
It points it right back at us.
Yeah.
And that is a very hard pill for us to swallow.
Unpack that systemic diagnosis for me. How is the phenomenon of fake news a symptom of a character flaw?
When citizens lack what Taylor calls the discipline of perception, the very discipline that liberal education and its engagement with nature are meant to cultivate, they become susceptible to retreating into what the legal scholar Cass Sunstein famously called information cocoons.
Echo chambers, filter bubbles.
Right. But we have to ask the deeper question. Why do we retreat into them? The algorithm might push us, but we willingly go. Taylor's Thoreauvian argument is that we retreat because we have come to believe what we want to believe. It is the final triumph of impulse over discipline.
It's Plato's democratic sun all over again, but applied to epistemology.
It's a perfect parallel. I want this conspiracy theory to be true because it validates my worldview and makes my political enemies look evil. Therefore, I will accept it as true, regardless of the evidence.
So the crisis of misinformation isn't just a supply problem created by bad actors, it's a demand problem created by undisciplined citizens.
Exactly. We're demanding comfortable lies because the actual truth is often complicated or challenging or inconvenient. We're performing that Paley calculation with reality itself. If this scientific fact threatens my tribe's economic interests or identity, I will discard the fact.
And this naturally leads to polarization as a total system failure.
It completely destroys what Thoreau called neighborliness. When you no longer have local knowledge, when you're living in the abstract, disconnected world of the times, you stop seeing the people in your town as neighbors. You see them as avatars for the ideology you've been taught to hate.
It becomes pure tribalism. Your identity is defined by who you are against.
And this is Plato's cycle of regimes playing out in the digital age. We're witnessing the normalization of demagogic rhetoric, of political behavior that would have been disqualifying a generation ago. And we ask, why is this happening? The system explains why. The incentive architecture of our media and political systems now actively rewards outrage. It rewards the short-term gratification of owning your enemies over the hard, long-term work of deliberation and compromise.
It's license that has been weaponized and scaled by technology.
Yes. And this is why the term crisis in perception is so analytically useful. It describes how the fragmentation of our reality prevents us from even diagnosing the system that is causing the fragmentation. We're so busy reacting to the daily noise, the latest tweet, the latest scandal, that we are structurally incapable of seeing the architecture that produces the noise.
We're all fighting with each other in the different rooms of a burning house without realizing that the foundation is rotten and the whole structure is about to collapse.
That's the guy.
So let's try to step back and see that architecture. As we head towards our conclusion, let's reflect on what this deep dive into Taylor's book really does. It completely reframes our understanding of democracy.
It really does. I mean, we're so used to talking about democracy as a single political system, but Taylor, through Thoreau, helps us see that democracy is actually a nested system.
It's a set of layers like Russian dolls.
Exactly. At the very top, the outer layer that everyone sees, you have the political system. That's the voting, the laws, the institutions. But that layer rests entirely on the one beneath it, which is the informational system. The possibility of a shared truth, of local knowledge, of distinguishing signal from noise.
And that informational system rests on an educational system, one that cultivates long-term thinking, historical consciousness, and cognitive discipline.
Which in turn rests on the deepest, most fundamental layer of all, the moral system. The character of the citizens, their capacity for restraint, for self-government, for independence of thought.
And if that that moral foundation crumbles,
The entire structure comes down.
Right.
It has to. You cannot have a functioning free society built on a foundation of citizens who are only capable of license. As the writer Mark Lilla put it, democracies without democrats do not last.
that right there feels like the final proposition of this entire deep dive. Democracies without Democrats.
And we have to be clear, a Democrat, in this sense, has nothing to do with a political party. A Democrat is a person who is capable of the art of self-government.
Taylor's analysis really drives home that classic distinction between negative liberty and positive liberty.
It's central to the whole thing. Negative liberty is freedom from a king, freedom from external chains. And that's important. That's the first step.
That's the democratic son rebelling against his oligarch father. Get off my back.
Exactly. But positive liberty is freedom too. It is the acquired capacity to be your own master. It is the cultivation of that internal architecture of character that allows you to say no. No to your own worst impulses, no to the expediency of the crowd, no to the temptations of the market, no to the demagogue.
And without that internal structure of self-mastery.
Without the internal structures of restraint, the external structures of democracy are just a hollow shell waiting to collapse. You can write the most brilliant constitution in human history, but if the people it governs are sleepwalking, If they are fundamentally enslaved by their own appetites and fears, a tyrant will eventually just walk in and take the keys to the kingdom. They'll be welcomed as a savior.
So the ultimate lesson from Walden, seen through this lens, isn't go live in the woods and grow beans.
No. The lesson is wake up. Break the trance. Do the hard internal work of building the character that makes you ungovernable by tyrants on the one hand and unbuyable by markets on the other. Because that, in the end, is the only thing that can actually sustain the system.
That is a lot to process, but it certainly changes how I look at my newsfeed and my credit card statements and my own attention span. It turns out the guy sitting in the cabin by the pond was engaged in the most essential political act of all.
He was building a prototype for a free mind in a world designed to enslave it. It's not a retreat from politics. It's a call to arms for the soul.
And we have to give credit where it's due. This entire analysis has been drawn from Lessons from Walden by Bob Pepperman Taylor, published by the University of Notre Dame Press.
It's a dense, it's a thoughtful, and I think an incredibly necessary book for our current moment. We really do encourage you to read it for the full, nuanced argument. We've only been able to scratch the surface here today.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.
Stay awake.
See you next time.